Now, I'm very, very, very excited to introduce you to our next speakers. So Delegate Danica Roem from the Virginia House of Delegates is joining us. She represents the 13th District of the Virginia House as the first out and seated transgender state legislator in American history. Now, Danica was elected in 2017 and re-elected in 2019 and 2021. And as a 37-year-old stepmom, former newspaper reporter, and lifelong resident of the Prince William County part of Manassas. Now, Danica is going to be joined in conversation with our own amazing Raquel Crutcher. Raquel is Chief of Staff here at Power to Fly, keeps everything running smoothly, and she supports both our internal leadership team as well as our co-founders. Now, Raquel dedicated herself to advocating for equity in K-12 schools and institutions of higher learning, formerly at Next 100, Teach for America, and KIPP schools before joining Power to Fly. Raquel was the founding president of American University's NAACP chapter, as well as an NAACP Next Gen Fellow, a member of the inaugural class of KIPP Alumni Leadership Accelerator Fellows. And in 2021, the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools named Raquel a 30 under 30 changemaker for her work to combat educational inequality and racism. So I'm very excited to turn the floor over to you. Danica and Raquel, take it away.
All right. So Delegate Roem, it is so nice to meet you. I can't tell you how honored I am to be speaking with you today. So I was a resident of Virginia from 2016 to 2018. So I was very privileged to witness the history that you made alongside so many others. And so happy to have you here at Power to Fly. I want to pause and I want to start here because I feel like there's always need for a pause in a world full of a lot of chaos. I just want to ask, how are you?
Well, thank you for your kindness, Raquel. I am excited to chat with you today. So I hope you have a good time.
Lovely. So even though I know a little bit about you and your journey here, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you for our larger group. So let's start with what drew you to a career in politics?
Sure. So what drew me to a career in politics was in 2003 into the 2004 presidential campaign when I was in college. I was going from I was my sophomore year at the time. And that was the time where the then President of the United States, George W. Bush, was proposing a constitutional amendment, as in from the United States Constitution, to ban marriage equality nationwide. And this was also at a time where he was sending my friends and family out to Iraq as well as Afghanistan. And I wanted to understand every mechanism of, the federal government, really, to understand why proposals like that could even come up in the first place, and how the Senate Democrats, even with the minority, could block such a thing in the first place, as well as all the things that would have to go through the state legislatures and everything to go along with it. And at the time, I was, I had gone into journalism because I wanted to cover heavy metal for a living. I still love metal. That's still my biggest passion, away from politics and governing and such. And at the same time, I was looking for a second outlet, and so politics was, provided that very neatly. And every day, I would read every political story that you would find in the Olean Times Herald, the Buffalo News, and the New York Times, USA Today. Whatever I could get my hands on when I was in college, physically in Western New York, or when I was back home in Virginia, reading my local papers like the Potomac News, for example, or the Washington Post. And my grandfather once told me the basis of his education came from reading the newspaper every day, and that's what I did. I read the papers every day. I spent 2 hours every day reading about politics. And so even though I was never a great student, I went to an A10 school, but I didn't go to like an Ivy League school or something like that. Just from reading every single day for years, and I mean 7 days a week, 2 hours a day, every day. That informed me about campaigns, informed me about governing, and informed me about everything, that got me prepared to cover local, state, and federal governing bodies from the time a month after I graduated college in May 2006, when I started my first job at the Gainesville Times on June 12th, 2006. all the way until December 31st, 2016, which was my last day as a news reporter, before 3 days later I announced my candidacy for the 13th district of the Virginia House of Delegates. And because of my career in especially local journalism, but also my secret weapon was my time spent at the Hotline, which is part of the National Journal Group in DC, covering state and federal politics, campaign specifically for 3.5 years. I knew what I was doing, and I was well trained. I'd gone through the LGBTQ Victory Institute's campaign training program in November 2016. I went through Emerge Virginia's boot camp for Democratic women in February of 2017. And I'm now the executive director of Emerge Virginia, which is a pretty cool little twist there. And here I am today. I'm a third-term state legislator. We've passed 32 of my bills into law, all with bipartisan support, and in the South, here in Virginia, so which is not easy. And at the same time, what we've done is wildly consequential, including 10 bills to feed hungry kids. So I've taken just love of reading, especially keeping up on the news, practicing journalism. When I, wrote thousands of news stories as a reporter, and, supervised, reporters as an editor. And here I am today, taking that skill set and directly applying it to my job as a legislator.
Wow, what a path. I was like, print journalism with Gen Z. It's like, I would love to know your thoughts on that. It's changing so much as everyone completely transitions into the digital age. And so when you said you read newspaper every single day, I was like, wow, we don't do that anymore. But no, I thought that was incredible.
So my advice to Gen Z is you should, because your print paper still very much exists. And the thing about having a print paper, by the way, like let's just arbitrarily like pull this out, pull this here. I guess I'll have to unblur my background, is that this is different from just having like when you're looking for the stories that you want to see, and maybe you're going to scroll really fast. When you are physically opening a paper, you're going to see a lot of things that jump out at you. Here's my, when I was launching my state senate bid, which I'm on the ballot nuts for next year. And the thing about a print paper is it is finite. It cannot be hacked, changed, or anything. And even if you physically destroy one copy, there will still be hundreds, if not thousands, of others available. And therefore, number one, when you go to prove something, it has a lot more credibility when it's in printed word. Number two is that anyone who knows anything about the internet knows that just because something has been published online does not mean it necessarily stays there. I have lost thousands of stories and such, for that were online when servers changed and other things happened, but because I kept my physical copies of the newspaper, I didn't lose my entire body of work. And I've got stacks and bins of those in my closets right now, and so, I would certainly encourage your generation. And, I'm an elder millennial, as Eliza Schlesinger would say. I was born September 30th, 1984. So yeah, actually quite literally pick up a copy of your paper, especially if you have a local paper. They're usually like 50 cents, $1, and go learn.
Yes, I'm a millennial with you. My grandma, my great grandma, my mom, we all believe in newspapers. So there's newspaper everywhere in the house. So when I meet someone who also loves print journalism, I'm like, I love this. I love this. But I wanted to pivot back to something else you said, because I just want to be very clear. You were the first out and seated transgender state legislator in American history. Full pause, because that's incredible. What do you think this indicates about trans visibility and acceptance, and where can we grow?
Sure. Well, so keep in mind, I was one of 8 out trans candidates who were elected on November 7th, 2017. And at the time, we had about a dozen or so who happened to already have been in office. So it's not like I was the first trans person to ever be elected to anything. And in fact, there was even a closeted trans woman who served one term, Althea Garrison, in the Massachusetts State House in the 90s, before she was outed against her will. And for what's changed since my election is that when you have increased representation, you are presenting the possibility that something is achievable to other people who've never been able to see themselves actually represented in a space that they think that they belong in. And in my case, once I earned election in 2017, the next year, 3 trans women ran for state legislature and won. 2 seats in New Hampshire between Jerry Cannon and Lisa Buckner, and 1 in Colorado with Brianna Tone. And Brianna had reached out to me right after the 2017 campaign and asked me, hey, this is something I'd like to do too. What should I do? And I told her to go get trained. And she did with the Victory Institute and Emerge Colorado, which is exactly what I did with Victory Institute and Emerge Virginia. And she won. She flipped the seat right to blue that fall. And so we went from 0 to 1 to 4 out trans state reps. And then then the following year, I earned re-election. And the following year after that, in 2020, we added 4 more while also re-electing Brianna, Jerry, and Lisa. And then we added Sarah McBride, the first out trans state senator in the country in Delaware. We had Taylor Small, who's our youngest our out state trans legislator. Stacey Marie Lawton, who had originally won an election, but she wasn't allowed to be seated. And this time she was able to be seated. And we also added Stephanie Byers, the first Native trans woman to be elected. She did it in Kansas, into a state legislature. And even though Stephanie's retiring this upcoming year, as well as Lisa, the fact of the matter is at this point, for us to go from 1 to 4 to 8, I think what that says is, hey, we're not going back to 0. We are part of your community just as much as anyone else. And that when we have good ideas, we should be able to bring them forward, and we should be able to put our names on the ballot just like anyone else. And hopefully that encourages people, and we have the data to show it, that when you actually meet a trans person, and especially when you see a trans person in public office, do a good job. In my case, securing money to fix Route 28, feeding hungry kids, fighting, above ground transmission lines along the I-66 corridor between Gainesville and Haymarket, and such. When you're able to do something like that, you're able to demonstrate, hey, we are a part of your community. And the fact of the matter is, we always have been. It's just that now we're allowed to say that we are. And I like to think that we're at a place where people say, like, okay, well, you're my neighbor. And even if I don't understand your life, even if I don't get where you're coming from, I do share the same concerns that you have. And I think that you'll do a really good job.
Yep. And speaking of those concerns, because the thing that I think it amazes me, and I know so many others, is history has never been quiet, but from the time you started until right now, there is a lot going on. And progress, a lot of people feel like it's been slow, and people are starting to feel a little disconnected and cynical about politics in general. I mean, I started organizing and I stopped organizing, and I had to get to the point where I said, I need like fuel. And a lot of people can't find that fuel. So we love to know what keeps you being hopeful, and why should other people be hopeful for politics, for change, for advocacy in general.
So remember, politics is a pendulum. As it goes here, it will go here, it will swing back and forth. And when you're trans, you don't have the luxury of nihilism, cynicism, or checking out. You have to be resilient. You're going to have to be resilient your entire life. You have to persevere your entire life. You know that from the day you're born until the day you die, things will never be perfect. They will never be what they should be, but you can move the needle every step along the way. And yes, burnout is very real. You know what the best combat for burnout is? Winning elections. Because boy, you feel pretty good when you win elections.
I bet.
And so yeah, that is the ultimate balm for burnout, is winning. And so, yeah, go win some more elections. And this is not going to be a great year for a lot of people who share our values. And at the same time, let's find the ones where we can. Let's, even if we have to salvage at the margins, that margin could be the difference between someone actually having representation and someone actually having their rights taken away. Remember, every single year, especially in Virginia, is an election year. Whether it's at your municipal level, whether it's your county level, whether it's your state, federal level, there's always something somewhere where you can activate, change just by showing up and by working to make it happen. And yeah, if you lose a lot of elections in a row, it can be tough. And at the same time, you don't have the luxury of giving in and giving up on it, because if you do, who fills that void? People who don't necessarily have your best intentions and your, and your needs in mind. And so just remember that phrase, if not now, who? If not you, when?
Whew. Sorry, I had to take that one in for myself. I'm listening to you speak, and I'm wondering if you are clued into, there's a bunch of debates happening right now about like organizing versus advocacy, activism versus policy and politics. And I'd love to know, just because I think you probably fit into all of those buckets, how do you think organizing, activism, and policy all actually impacts politics moving forward? And how can like the everyday person choose an avenue to have an impact on, a Delegate Roem?
Sure. So first, let's start with the campaigning, right? You can't have policy proposals on the table unless you win elections. That's, as a legislator, for me anyway, or as an executive, that's fundamental. Of course, citizens can bring change. They can, whether it's filing referendums, recall petitions, whatever else, there's always going to be citizen-led, initiatives, of course. At the same time, you have to win elections in a representative democracy within a republic in order for your elected leaders to be the ones who are deciding the public policy positions that directly affect your life, right? And so, number one, by winning elections and by having the volunteers and the support and the advocates who are, doing the work of making phone calls, knocking on doors, recruiting volunteers, raising money, and doing all the other sort of stuff like that, that's what it takes to actually win an election in the first place. But then you don't stop once you get there. Great example of that was in 2017. I campaigned on expanding Medicaid after my predecessor, voted against expanding Medicaid. And, our volunteers supported it, our entire staff supported it. And after we won, our staff and volunteers, they didn't give up. They kept the policy conversation going when they came down to Richmond, and they would speak in subcommittee. They would talk to legislators individually, and they lobbied their state legislators on expanding Medicaid. And on May 30th, 2018, we did exactly that when we voted for it. And, coverage began on January 1st of 2019. And today we have now enrolled more than 667,000 Virginians, including more than 33,000 here in Greater Prince William, into Medicaid expansion, while also expanding the services provided by Medicaid, including dental care for adults, for example. That's life-changing and life-affirming. And in fact, Medicaid even covers transition-related healthcare, as the trans man in Roanoke was able to, successfully have his top surgery covered for Medicaid, in part because we also passed one of my bills, HB 1429 from 2020, that prohibits discrimination in healthcare based on trans status. And so, long story short with this, is that it's one thing for us to just win elections. It's another thing for us to be involved on the policy end once we do win. And so both of those work in tandem. And it's like, don't give up on one just because you won the other. You got to stick with it. You got to stick at it.
So we got a really good question from the audience, which I think could be really good for right now, just because I feel super motivated. And I'm wondering about the people who don't. So Kat says, for people who do have the luxury to be apolitical, what's the best resources you can suggest to encourage them to care?
The best resource is you as a person having that individual conversation, because if someone is apolitical in that regard, then perhaps they might not believe that their own civil rights are on the line, that their economic, ability to climb is on the line, or anything along those lines, that their commute could be better. There's so many different things that you can tap into, but it can take having that direct conversation with someone that they know, where they might even say, you know what, even if it's not my rights that are being affected, it's yours, and I don't want you to hurt. It could also be something as simple as saying, like, hey, we've got a whole community initiative here where we're trying to protect tree canopies, we're trying to create affordable housing, or we're trying to make sure that we have mass transit, or that the roads that we do have actually don't slow down and hurt people by, inadequate infrastructure, or we're trying to make sure that we have clean, safe drinking water pipes, for example. There's so many things that someone can get involved in, but very often you can't just drop a bunch of literature on someone's door and just hope and expect that they're going to read it when they're necessarily identified as apolitical. It takes having a quality conversation. You are that best resource. Go engage someone.
That's so true. And I want to continue to push that. Jubilee has a series on YouTube called Middle Ground, where people from different sides of any aisle come together and have really intense conversations. And I was watching one over the weekend. I don't remember the topic, but I remember there was one particular person whose entire ideas changed once he heard the other people's stories. It was like instant. And so just to like plus one everything you're saying, it really does matter when people can see the humanity and what's going on, and when they can see themselves and people sitting right across from them.
Here's a great example. Last year, when Virginia voted to repeal the death penalty, for example, my own position on the death penalty has been very fungible over the years prior to last year, in a way, because number one, I never expected that we were going to have the vote to do it. But the other thing was, when I was a reporter, I had to watch someone who was the worst of the worst die in the electric chair. I mean, in person, I was the second to last person he ever looked at. And, the things that he did, that he openly admitted to doing, were genuinely heinous, right? And someone like him is the prototype for why it existed in the first place. And as far as I was concerned, the electric chair had simply done to his outsides what had already been done to his soul many, many years before. At the same time, I had to think, is my vote on repealing the death penalty about someone who's like him, the next person in line? Or is it someone like George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old Black boy in South Carolina who was falsely accused of killing two young girls and was forced into a coerced confession without an attorney or even an adult, from his family present, was rushed into a courtroom where, instead of a trial in front of his peers, he had an all-white jury. He had a defendant who called no witnesses, called for no appeal, and was executed within 89 days of that court hearing, where they had to put a booster under his rear so that his head could reach the electrodes of the helmet. And when they hit him with the high beams, his mask fell off, and his father had to see the tears streaking along his face. And since then, that miscarriage of justice has, rather than be called exonerated, it was basically more or less by a judge, said that, like, hey, this should have never happened in the first place. This was a miscarriage of justice by any stretch of the imagination. And today he would probably be 93 years old. And chances are you and I know someone who's 93 years old. And that raised the question to me, am I voting to kill the next Paul Powell, who is the person I watched die, or am I voting to save the next George Stinney? And how many other times are we going to look back at an execution and say, oh, well, things have changed since then. It's a little bit different now. How many more other mistakes have to happen in that system where, okay, we're not going to make mistakes anymore? The fact of the matter is, in Virginia's history, in the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, Black men could be condemned to die in the electric chair for rape, but white men could not be. The death penalty and its application in Virginia throughout its history has been profoundly racist. Even if the guy I watched die was white, when you look at the data and who was tried and who was killed in the electric chair, and you can look at the Martinsville 7, that's a classic situation where men were, Black men were treated differently than white men. The fact of the matter is, when I had to cast a vote, I had to listen and do a lot of research and a lot of, soul searching really at the end of the day. And it's okay for you to evolve as a person and to learn and to make an informed decision based on conversations and based on research and based on understanding, existing precedent. That's how I applied it for the death penalty. I spoke, for a long time on the House floor, the virtual House floor for it. And at the same time, I can't even imagine what it would be like today to be a part of George Stinney Jr.'s extended family, knowing that he should still be alive today had the state of South Carolina not killed him.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And I'm over here getting emotional because it's a really tough story, and it's a really tough, it's an incredibly tough thing to discuss. But I'm listening to you speak, and I completely understand why you are an award-winning politician. I think you just are an incredible, thinker, doer, leader. But what is it about you that you think earns people's trust and confidence? And I have an idea of an answer to that question, as someone who trusts and has confidence in you. But for everyone else, how can they know who to trust and who to have confidence in? How do people know that the people they're electing are thinking like you, and they're keeping their minds open, and they're keeping their people first?
So I'll give you a lesson I learned from U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin. She represents Wisconsin. She's the first out lesbian to be elected to the United States Senate. And when she was still a representative, she had a constituent tell her, well, if you're willing to be honest about that part of your life with me, then I guess I can trust you to be honest about a lot of other things too. And for me, to be out as a transgender metalhead reporter, yogini, stepmom, vegetarian who was unemployed, uninsured, and driving a $324 92 Dodge Shadow when I kicked off my first campaign while living at my mom's house. Fact of the matter is, I don't know how to be more authentic than that. I don't know how to put myself and tell my story more authentically than that, and saying like, yep, all of this is true about me. And the reason I actually wrote my book, Burn the Page, in the first place was entirely about trying to tell you and tell other people how to set fire to the stories you don't want to be in anymore. And the entire point of that is to own your own narrative. And by doing that, along with the fact that I spent 4 years earning my journalism degree and 10 and a half years professionally telling stories for a living as a news reporter, I communicate. And the way that I communicate, I don't talk down to people as I do it. I try to be funny, here and there, as I'm doing it. I try to keep your attention, but I also try not to get you lost in the legalese. I try not to get you lost in the minutia of everything, even though I very much can at will, depending on my audience. Instead, I try to break it down so that it's easy to visualize what it is that I'm saying. And then when you actually look at my record and I put my stuff right out there on social media, I've done hundreds of news interviews over the years. And when you look at my campaign finance reports and you realize that I don't take any money from for-profit corporations, their PACs, their lobbyists, or their trade associations, that we run people-powered campaigns that are funded by progressive advocacy organizations and basically people who share our values, and mostly by individual human beings, that when you put that all together, you're like, okay, you know what? Even if I don't agree with you, I at least know that your motives are coming from a place where you are genuinely concerned about what it is that you're voting on, and that your vote's not just for sale to the highest bidder. And that's the way I've conducted myself, as the reporter turned legislator. I'm trying to hold myself to the same standard that I thought as a reporter, elected official should be at.
Amazing. That's amazing. So we have 2 minutes left, and I have a ton of questions, but I want to pivot to the last audience question because I think it's a great question from Chase. Chase wants to know if you can talk about accessible ways to be active and engage meaningfully with politics in light of the pandemic, where people have limited access, specifically disabled folks.
So the first thing that I always recommend, if you want to be engaged in politics, go get bored in a planning commission meeting. Go sit in front of your board of zoning appeals. Go sit in front of your city council, your board of supervisors, your alder people, whoever it is, and go watch local government happen right before your very eyes. And then go back a second time and a third time and start to see how things are changing and understand the issues that are coming up. The best way to get involved is to quite literally show up or tune in and learn about something that might be completely different than what you expected, but you might find pretty quickly that you have really strong feelings about historic artifacts and their preservation, for example, after you learn about them, right? And I think that once you start getting engaged and you start showing up, you can develop very strong feelings about the things that you're seeing. And then you get involved in your community by testifying in citizens' time, writing letters to your legislators, writing letters to the editor for that matter, and just genuinely by caring. And once you do, get involved in campaigns. And if it's your time and it's time for that's right, go get trained to run for office. If you're a Democratic woman in Virginia, come to me with Merge Virginia, or just go to Merge America more broadly. If you're LGBTQ, go through the Victory Institute. And over and all, just remember, we win some elections, we lose some elections, but stick with it and stick at it, because this is your government too, and it's time for you to run it.
Thank you so much, Delegate Roem. It was so nice speaking with you, and really appreciate all the gems in this conversation. Thank you so much.